Welcome to On the Rise. I am Evan Murray, and this is awesome. We're here to talk about all the fun facts of Chinese language music.
Recently, we had, we're running Jade Music Festival, which is the Chinese language showcase conference in Canada, and CBC has partnered with us now. So I think there's some real change happening. I think there's some people that are paying attention. Is what I'm trying to say. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting shift because as a Chinese speaking artist, and I feel like it's almost impossible for me to not include aspects of that into my work just because certain concepts I can't even explain properly. It just gets lost in translation. So in my album, I code switch a lot. Certain things I'll say in English, certain things I'll say in Mandarin or Taiwanese, just based on what I'm saying and what makes sense. The most at least to me, that
what a
feels
spectrum. That's very interesting that you say that, because that's like a spectrum of awareness or perspective. Because if you're thinking in different languages, one of the things we know for sure is English doesn't translate with Mandarin very well. You have to kind of reconstruct it. But then Taiwanese is even more complicated because Taiwanese is this poetic language or metaphorical language, let's say. So that's so interesting how you're caught. Your own consciousness must travel through different perspectives on, or how you see things must become so more animated. Or can you talk a little bit about that?
I was actually having dinner last night with Kanatao. They're
Canada, the band, the indigenous band we have over in.
And we were having this conversation around dinner, and we all kind of agreed that our personalities change a little bit when we speak a different language, just because and I've heard this before from other people, that I think languages make you think differently, just makes you the way you understand the concept and relations between things is different just because they relate to each other differently in the language. Certain languages are more imagery or metaphorical, and I don't know. I think it does bring out a different side of you and shifts things. So it is interesting because I'm so used to code switching back and forth between things. So today when I was on stage and I would just say sentences in English and then go to Mandarin because it was a very mixed audience, it felt like the most natural and comfortable thing to be doing because that's how I speak to my family a lot.
Okay, so and talk to me about this code switching. So does that mean when you're talking about a subject and then you're identifying different things in the content of which you're speaking, is that where you're switching on and off to kind of expand the the visual understanding of somebody else? Is that what you mean?
I think for myself, it depends on who I'm talking to. Obviously if they're also bilingual, I usually pick the most efficient route. So if an idea falls out more easily in one language, that would be my go-to. And sometimes it's going back and forth depending on the subject matter. But I also find myself frustrated sometimes trying to explain something in one language and then not being able to if the person doesn't understand the other language. If I'm talking to an English speaking person and I'm trying to explain this cultural thing and I'm I don't have the words for any of these things in English. And then vice versa. If I'm trying to explain parts of my life here to my dad, he wouldn't understand some of it and I would have to kind of pick my brain a little bit about how can I best make this make sense to him.
And you're very native English too. You sound absolutely native English. So because how old were you when you moved to Vancouver again? You were
11.
Oh yeah. Okay. But I just can't even, if I met you and I didn't know you and I had no background on you, I wouldn't even know that you speak a different language. I just wouldn't, and then if you started, I'd be I'd be surprised because your English sounds so native. Yeah.
Yeah, even most Taiwanese people get really surprised when I start speaking Mandarin to them. They're like, what? I come off very Canadianized or whatever that means,
No, there's something to that. And that's one thing that I think Canadians, when people say especially Western Canada, maybe not all the way to West, but what is Canadian culture? What is it? Calendar culture? I don't know. I don't know what it is, right? We follow the calendar and that's what our culture is. I don't know what it is. I can't identify it because I have no idea. I can look at other cultures and be oh, that's cultural what you're doing. But then when I see things about my own life, I'm this isn't what hockey? When I played, or is that I don't know.
I think my perception of the Canadian culture is an identity crisis. And I mean this more specifically for like white Canadians who don't know where they're from. I feel like a lot of people up until the last few years have gotten away with just saying they're Canadian, and it only works if you're white. Like, even if I was born and raised here, like you said, like I can speak in perfect English, no one would ever know that I wasn't born here. But I still got asked constantly where I'm from just based on the fact that I
See, that's
wasn't
such an
white.
interesting thing to say. I mean, that's really important because that is significant, right? I mean, how are you supposed to feel at home if everyone doesn't think you're at home, right? Or everyone's
Yeah,
imagining you're, oh, well, look at the color of her skin. She must be from somewhere else, which is such a weird thing to say because, again, there's, Canadians have been, since the inauguration of the country, people have been in Canada from all over the world too, So it's a
yeah,
very, it is. And you're right. I mean, I have a little bit of luck because I have, my family is rooted from Newfoundland, and Newfoundland has a kind of a distinct culture in Canada. But growing up in Western Canada, like again, like in a lot of my friends, like people will call me like you're European Canadian, and I'm like, yeah, but I've been to Europe a bunch of times. I've toured all over there. Like I'm definitely not European. Like I might look
yeah,
like European, but the thing is like, and then I think like, well, who am I? Like I'm Canadian, but what does that mean? Right. So
yeah.
it's
I think that's
so
a great question. No, I think
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
really great question that more white North Americans should be asking themselves because they've never really had to ask that until like I think like more recent generations. Like I feel like in like maybe like our parents' time, like being a white Canadian was just like the default accepted standard. I think
sure.
when a lot of Europeans came over, they deliberately severed their roots from where they're from and like created this identity. But if you really want to talk about Canadian culture, it's colonial culture.
It
It's this
is.
colonial idea of like being
Like I
able to just
said,
show up
calendar
somewhere and be
calendar culture.
like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm here now. This is mine. I belong here. This belongs to me. Like that's colonial culture. So I feel like to like decolonize and untangle that, people really need to start to question like, who the fuck am I? Like, where am I from? And sit with that discomfort that their ancestors made that deliberate choice to come over here for whatever reason and cut off that tie and didn't pass on those cultural practices that
Yeah,
everybody had.
like sever them. I'm going to tell you something really interesting because I've had this kind of conversation with some people. So I was in Ukraine in 2019, and so in Alberta, Saskatchewan, I don't mean to derail this conversation, but I think it's just worth noting because of what you brought up. So like I grew up around a bunch of supposedly Ukrainian people, right? In Alberta and Saskatchewan, and the thing is like when I was in Ukraine, I learned so many things that like these people are not Ukrainian. They're like, like people in Ukraine don't eat pierogies. Like I like we're just like brainwashed in Alberta. Like pierogies are from Ukraine, and it's like it's not. They're just potato dumplings that people actually make in Poland. But
Oh,
anyways, I could talk like there's a bunch of things I could bring up. Even
I
the
didn't know that.
Ukrainian people call it like they call their grandparents Baba and Guido. In Ukraine, they're like, what? What does that mean? And I was like, really?
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's like there's a sever. What you just said is so correct. It is like absolutely 100%. It was severed. I don't know what happened when they moved here. If they mixed up or they started, you know, having babies with other people. I have no idea, but it's severed. It is. And I mean, even like for me, like I have Scandinavian and like Irish and Scottish culture, but like I'm not those things. Like I've been to Sweden, I've been to Denmark. Like I'm not Swedish. You know what I mean? Like identity wise at all. Like we act different. We're different people,
Hmm.
So that's sorry, I don't mean to take over the
No,
conversation,
that's
but
okay.
yeah, it's very illuminating, and I think more people need to think about that as well. It's
Hmm.
all right. So back to our conversation.
Yes. Yes.
Why did you choose to be a musician?
I don't know if it was an active choice. I feel like music has always been in my life. Like my family sings a lot. My mom is a beautiful singer. My dad sang to me. Karaoke culture is huge in Taiwan, as you probably know.
I do know.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
so yeah, I think singing and music has just been such an important part of my life. And I was really lucky to have been able to, I guess, like make the choice of making it a bigger focus in my life than like just like the average person. I think I would have played and sang music regardless. And I think there was something, um, I think it was like a kind of calling. Like I couldn't not do it. So I might as well do my best to do it as much as possible.
How about, can you teach me something to say? Can you teach me something to say that something useful or life-saving or even slang? Is there something you could teach me that I could use here in Taiwan while I'm here?
Okay, I don't know if you learned this one yet, but this is like one of the most important things that I taught my bandmates while we were there. 不用袋子,
不用袋子,
不用袋子.
Does that mean I don't speak Chinese?
No, it means I don't need a plastic bag.
Okay. Because every time I'm at Family Mart or 7-Eleven or buying any street food, everyone's trying to get everything in a plastic bag. Yeah.
You get a plastic bag with everything you do. So as a person who doesn't want a plastic bag, I feel like saying that is very important because like they might not even understand like, what do you mean you don't want a plastic bag? Everybody gets one, you know? So like I taught my bandmates so quick because I saw them struggle with that interaction. I'm just like, just say 不用袋子 and they'll get
Well, I know Bill because my daughter loves, like, that was her first word she ever said, and she just loves that word so much, like Biao, Biao, and Mao. She just loves that. She's like, come here and sit down, Biao, Biao, you know. So I knew that part was no. But so can you just say it a little bit slower for me?
不用
不用
袋子
袋子.
袋子
Is it da, like da?
袋
袋子.
袋 like 袋子 yeah
Like 袋子.
袋子 yeah
袋子. So 不要袋子.
yeah
Yeah, 不要, because I know, yeah, 没有. Yeah, it was. I knew it was something to do with no. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. That's useful. So that's very useful, actually. So
yeah. And there's like a slight distinction. Like if you say 不要, it more means like I don't want.
Right.
Like,
okay.
I don't want it. But if you say 不用, it's more like a polite way in that like retail context because it means I don't need it.
I don't need it. Or it's like
one's like, oh, I don't want it versus like, oh, it's not necessary. Like I don't need it. 不用袋子.
Okay, it's just being more polite, right?
Yeah, like it feels a little bit like it's just a little bit more polite and when you're talking to like a random person.
It shows you're just being a little bit more respectful.
Yeah, rather than be like, I don't want your bag.
Like,
it's more like, don't worry about it.
Yeah. What does it mean to you personally that Canada is elevating Chinese languages now with this Jade Music Festival Showcase Conference?
I think it's really exciting. I was like an artist who likes to dabble in these things because mainstream music is not going to pick up like Chinese music, even Chinese blended music. Even on my album, the fact that my intro track was not in English offended some white people. Like there were people who were upset about that and like were like messaging me to change that. They're like, you should put the English songs first. Yeah, it was, I mean, I'm not entirely surprised, but you know what? Like, I feel like I'm doing my job if it's like provoking somebody who's so used to things being about them that like they can't, they feel like they need to tell a random person that like they don't like that they didn't understand the first track to the album. I'm like, I don't care.
Like,
I don't care about your opinion. Yeah.
That's really interesting, actually. So the thing is like, yeah, because essentially what we're trying to do is like, we're recognizing that Canada, like, you know, we believe as Canadians, like Canada has actually a lot to gain from this. So like, because it's about time, right? Like it's about time that there's so many people in Canada that have Chinese language and they're speaking Chinese languages. Like, why didn't this happen since the beginning of Canada? You know what I mean? Like, how is it that this kind of unfolded the way it did? But obviously those are political and societal things that are obviously so complicated. I'm not really sure, but it is exciting to think there could be a marketplace for Chinese languages in Canada, and that, you know, that this is something that's never happened before, right? Like this isn't something that's ever been, like CBC has never joined in on something like this. This is all first time and we're sitting here in 2022, right?
Yeah, I think it's especially exciting because like the possibilities that could mean for Chinese speaking artists. I think having that cohesion can connect audiences that want that, but maybe don't know where to look for it. And also like artists that want to connect with an audience that's interested in their work, but like also doesn't know where to find these audiences because like maybe sometimes they're like an older generation and they're not on like Facebook and Instagram. So like where do we find these people? So I think like for example, if we talk about the Junos is a great place for people to discover new like Canadian artists that they don't know. You know, I was at a music festival this summer and the curator or like one of the organizers was like, "Yeah, like I booked this person because I just like to go on like the Junos nominees playlists and see who's like interesting artists that I just don't know about yet, like up and comers and stuff, who are making cool stuff." So they'll go on the Junos nominees lists to discover new artists. So if there's like an equivalent of that where like promoters or bookers or just interested audiences can like go to this place to find a consolidated list of like dope Chinese music artists.
Right.
Yeah, I think that would open up a lot of doors on both sides.
Talking about interconnectedness, talking about these things that connect us and bring us together. What about your grandparents? Like, how much of a influence did they have on you? And what about your grandparents' favorite music? Or tell me just about them in general, and tell me about if their music stylings or tastes had any influence on you.
Yeah, that was an interesting question to see because I never met two of my grandparents. Like my dad's parents passed away when I was either not born or like basically a baby. I think there's a photo of his dad holding me as a baby, and I think that was the first and last time we ever saw each other. So I don't really have any memories of them. I grew up around my mom's parents and mostly my mom's family. Her father passed away when I was three-ish, and
Mm.
but I have very distinct memories of him, like very vivid, like early childhood memories of just like little blips of the things that we would do together and the way that I felt around him. He was like a very caring, loving man from my experiences and all the stories that I've heard about him. And the grandparent that I spent the most time with was definitely my mom's mom. We gardened a lot together. I cooked a lot with her. Um, yeah, she's pretty much the reason I know how to speak Taiwanese at all. Because like you don't need to speak Taiwanese to like kind of get around Taiwan and just like be a person. But my grandma doesn't really speak Mandarin, so the only way that I could communicate with her was through knowing Taiwanese.
Mm.
And she again is like a very lovely, loving person in like kind of like a quiet, stoic way. She wasn't like the super huggy, cuddly um grandma vibe. She was like kind of like a smaller woman, but she had a way of just making you feel loved and always made sure that everyone was fed and cared for. And her children all just loved her so much, like my mom and uncles.
I
Yeah, she
love
raised a lot
quiet,
of the
stoic
grandkids.
people. I
Yeah.
love quiet. I mean, those are people that have obviously lived a life that we could probably, it would be hard to imagine, let's say.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. I think all my grandparents kind of had a difficult life. My dad's parents were from Hainan in China, and they left when the Civil War kind of happened. They like kind of went to Vietnam kind of as refugees and eventually ended up in Taiwan. And that just sounded like a really difficult period because it was also like Japanese occupation throughout their lives. And yeah, I can't imagine there was so many wars and deaths that had happened around that time. Yeah, and that displacement of like leaving everything behind and ending up like, they weren't, neither of my grandparents' families were very wealthy from what I understand.
well, and they would have
So,
lived through the
yeah,
White Terror as well. And I mean, this place was pretty crazy, for a while,
yeah,
like around this area. Um, yeah, that would have been some really
yeah. So in terms of
complicated.
music,
Yeah.
I don't have any memories of music with my grandparents. I don't think my grandma had a musical playing device. Like, I don't think she had a radio. She had one television that she would watch, like, some, like, Taiwanese old, like, sitcoms on, like, in the evening and maybe, like, the news. And then she had, like, a landline telephone. Like, she lived in a very traditional, place, there's definitely no internet. There's just one cable TV with like 7 channels and then like a landline. So I don't think she had a music playing device. So my musical experiences kind of came from my parents, and I think my dad's mom sang to him from what I've heard, and he sings like some of those songs to me when I was a kid. And then my mom, I think, just like fell in love with singing and music through her own like adolescence and being in choir and things like that.
Interesting. I mean, it is interesting. I just, I learned a lot of the history since I've been here, and to kind of hear you talk about, your grandmother and, your experience with your grandparents in that sort of way. It's, yeah, it's nice. It's nice to hear about that. It's sad in a way, but it's nice that you're, attached to that, that you have like some grounding there. And I mean, obviously, if the music came out somewhere and it traveled through your mother and father and got to you. So, I mean, I guess that's, some of the important stuff. And what about special habits when you're writing songs? What about that? Do you have any kind of ritual? Do you have habits? Do you have,
I write a lot near water. Like a lot of my songs have been conceived.
and are you
Like
doing that
them.
intentionally, or does it happen that way?
I think it happens that way. Like I don't think I ever like go like I'm gonna write a song today. I feel like
I'll go sit by the water. And then you're
like
okay.
songs tend to find me. Like I've heard of this other artists speak of like muses. Like I feel like there's just like ideas and stuff floating the world, whether they're like a story idea or a song or like whatever. They find people, like we have little like antennas, and some of them become more.
Come on, there's like a
Yeah.
phenomenon where like you'll hear a new word and then all of a sudden other people start saying it, or there's this kind of phenomenon thing that happens, which is super weird. So
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think like
something about that.
yeah, I think artistic ideas find people, and I have that relationship with my songs. Like they never feel like mine. I feel like I hear them in like sometimes like I'm just like by the water and then the winds, and like they'll just start looping in my head. Most of my songs start as just like being stuck in my head, and I just have to get them out. Whether it's like singing them repeatedly until the next part unfolds, or like just writing it out, or doing like a voice note recording, or just like scribbling notes in my notebook. Like that's kind of how they start. And like really commonly they start when I'm quiet and grounded and at peace within, and like not distracted by like other people or like technology. And when I get to spend long periods of time by bodies of water, whether it's like a beach or a lagoon or something, I think that's when I'm the most present to be able to hear those things.
Okay, where the you're creating space, let's say maybe there's space and there's thing you're feeling inspired, you're feeling influenced, and you just notice that it's usually when you're near bodies of water.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. That's almost fairy. It's like a fairy maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm not, it's just interesting because like, why would that be? I mean, do you have any idea why that would be? Do you listen to Chinese language music? Like, do you listen to much of it at all?
Not as much now.
Right,
I
because you were
grew
saying like you're so involved in like your own life in Canada and what you're doing, and I, it would. This brings back again, like you're interacting with the people in your life, like directly in your life as well, right? Instead of Coca-Cola cans. So, I mean,
Yeah.
but can you pick a Chinese song that you think that you would like to introduce to, other, let's say, non-Chinese speaking Canadians, and why would that be important to them? Or what do you think, what kind of meaning or emotion that you could kind of give to them?
Well, I feel like this Chinese song that I've shared the most with non-Chinese speaking people has been the Green Island song. Like it just
Right.
means so much to me that like I usually end up just gravitating towards that. Like I've sang it at this show, I've sang it at another show that I was in, and just like in various experiences where I'm like, hey, you want to hear this lullaby my dad used to sing me? I think there's just something about like what it means to me and the place that it brings me, like in a very like nurturing, safe, like childhood and homey space, that it's like connected with other people. And it's also just a very, very beautiful song.
Well, there's something about beauty, and I think this is important to know, that beauty kind of transcends language as well. Like I think that, like I mixed and mastered Canada's live performance before they went to Canada, and like I can't understand a thing they're saying, right? But the thing is, like, spending time listening to the harmonies and then having to edit the vocals and edit the performance, and doing that. Like the thing is now, like when the team posts videos of them, or when I see some clips of their performances in Canada, like it's like, it really resonates with me. I still don't know what they're saying. Like I still, but like something about beauty, the texture of beauty, or the melody of beauty is, it affects me. Like, it affects me. And then I have a memory of beauty too, because of it. You know what I mean? And maybe that's something that maybe within all of the different aspects of art you're doing, and, physical and spiritual and auditorial and visual, is that maybe that's something like offering beauty to people is a way to encapsulate them, so that they'll want to learn more about you and want to learn more about what you're doing. Because I mean, beauty is something, I think, that it doesn't have a language, it has a feeling. It like offers something to you, and then you're like, oh, like it draws you near, it magnetizes you towards it. So with your music and with your message and with your art, I hope that a person like you is able to have platforms to speak about these things, because I think you can articulate yourself very well. And I think that there's the kind of knowledge that you're sharing even right now is very important. And I think someone like you that has the graciousness, that wants beautiful things for people. What is the most awesome thing that has ever happened to you? The most awesome thing.
It's like the cheesiest thing, but I think like having music in my life has been like the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me, and I can't imagine my life without it. Just like the amount of experiences and people that I've been able to meet because of like the fact that I'm like, like I play music or whatever. It's astounding to me. Like most of my most significant relationships have been people that I either play music with or like connected with on that level, which have brought us like closer, and now we're like, like actual like real life friends beyond working together. But like, yeah, I think the community that I've been connected to, and also just like the amount of like joy and healing and expression, and like just always something that I can turn to when things get a little too hectic in life. I can't even begin to describe the amount, all the ways that music has enriched and like saved my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's been like the X factor, right? Like it's been this like this thing that you could never have imagined would have accumulated so many experiences and situations. And that's all from trying to share beauty in the world, right?
Yeah. And so much of it is just like me. Like singing brings me so much joy. Like songwriting makes me so happy, and then just like getting to share that with other people is just like an extra bonus sauce. But it's just something that I love to do by myself, just like standing at the beach shouting into the wind. Just like I just love it in my room. Like I do karaoke alone on a regular basis. I'll just put on like YouTube songs with my like microphone with the reverb cranked up, and I'll just like sing my favorite cathartic songs, and that's how I process a lot of feelings.
Okay. Well, it was super nice to meet you. I very much look forward to meeting you when I'm in Vancouver for the Jade Music Festival. I hope that all comes together. And it was a pleasure to talk to you. And I hope that we can, talk again when I'm there, and we can talk about music and life and all of these great things that we talked about today. So thanks a lot, Vanessa.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, you too. This has been great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody. Make sure to subscribe and to hit that like button, or how they like to say, smash that like button. And yeah, and keep tuning in. Lots of interesting people, lots of interesting things to talk about. Take care.